Hey.
Hey, all right. Hey, everybody. And thanks for joining us here today for today's episode of the Outdoor State of Mind series. I'm Caroline Gleich,
And I'm Sasha DiGiulian.
and this episode today is brought to you by our friends at Cliff Bar. And so, Cliff Bar has been one of my sponsors for almost 10 years, and they've been one of the longest brand partners for Protect Our Winters. And I've just been so inspired and motivated by seeing their leadership on climate, on environmental sustainability, and social responsibility. And a cool thing they're doing as part of COVID relief efforts is they're donating 6.6 million Cliff Bars to workers who are on the front lines fighting the COVID pandemic. So a lot of love for Cliff Bar today. And I'm super excited today to welcome Sasha to the POW Alliance. And it's really cool just to see how much this has grown, because in 2011, I became one of the first athletes as part of the Protect Our Winters Alliance. And it was just me and Jeremy Jones and Forrest Shearer. And I think there were like one or two employees that worked at POW. And just to see how it's grown and it's really become this international movement, it gives me a lot of hope and confidence for how we're going to tackle climate change. So today we're going to talk about how I've continued to engage with community, take action on climate, and to celebrate Sasha joining, we're going to talk about lessons learned over the years as a climate activist and how to get involved. So Sasha, first off, welcome to the team. How long have you been a part of the outdoor state as a climber?
Great intro, Caroline. Nice to join all of you. Thanks for tuning in. It's awesome to be a part of POW now. I've been a part of the outdoor state this is my 21st year climbing. I started climbing when I was 6, and I started kind of like growing up in Mont Tremblant, which is just outside of Montreal, so in the Quebec region, and climbing like the Laurentians and, enjoying like snack times outside with my cousins, my brother. And then I have been a part of Access Fund and American Alpine Club, and I'm really psyched to be joining POW because it's really this, as you put it, like an international alliance of athletes from different sports, cross-pollinated and coming together to really unite on something that's so important.
That's so cool. 21 years you've been a climber? That's insane. I wanted to hear just a little bit more about your history with the sport and some of the opportunities and some of your accomplishments.
Yeah, sure. I mean, it's always tough to talk kind of like about your own accomplishments, but climbing has afforded me such an amazing passport to see the world in such immersive conditions, like going and camping in places like Madagascar or in parts of Indonesia, throughout Europe and Africa, Asia. So I think that having that window to travel and explore and to connect with people of different cultures has taught me a lot about the global language that can connect us through sport, and also the empowering aspect of these transformative skills that we learn in sport. And I think that something that we can all unite on, and what we see right now, is when there's something really important that the whole world needs to unify on, that's incredibly like what's happening right now, and kind of an example of the power that we can all have when we come together and recognize something that we should all put our efforts towards.
That's really cool. And I just want to take a second to brag, because you have so many first female ascents and first ascents, and you've been on the cover of like a bajillion magazines, and I think you're a world champion, right, for climbing?
Yeah, I won the world championships.
Oh, no big deal. That's so cool. Yeah, and you're no stranger to Capitol Hill in DC either. And I remember one of the first times we got to hang was in DC for Climb the Hill with the American Alpine Club and the Access Fund. And we had that Senate hearing, which was a lot of fun. So what was it that inspired you to want to get involved with advocacy in the first place?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's awesome. Like, that's how, Caroline, I've gotten to know you. It's how I've gotten aware of POW as seeing, POW is in DC just like a week before we met up with Access Fund and the American Alpine Club. And I think that, like, honestly, like, to the core, growing up in an area just like 2 miles from inner DC was, I grew up in like a landscape that was pretty heavy with politicians who are like my parents' friends, and getting more acquainted with what politics even mean on like a social level. And then I think that policy has really become really important to me because you see it firsthand in our sport. Like, global temperatures rising and sporadic temperatures that you see throughout the world, and really weird weather patterns lead to rockfall, which we experience as climbers. I'm really excited to hear more about like your side as a skier, because obviously like Protect Our Winters is a lot on snowfall and snowpack and what that's doing to our temperatures seasonally. But I think that it affects all of us in different ways throughout our sports, but also in the same ways too, which is pretty interesting. And I think that as I've grown in my profession, I found that it's really important to use my platform and my voice to affect change, because it's kind of like, if you don't embody your platform and the voice that you work so hard to have in your sport, then what's the point of having a voice,
Yeah.
So I think that's really important. And I think that my hopes are really to see more of this unifying effort that we can all have, that inspires me to be a part of POW now, as like skiers, snowboarders, climbers, like all of these different sports that happen in our natural playgrounds coming together and being like, hey, this is real, like this is important. But yeah, I mean, you were one of the original members. So like, what's been your experience with POW, and how come, like what drove you to be like, hey, this is important, I want to align with Jeremy and be a part of this?
Yeah. I mean, for one thing, it's just such a privilege to be able to recreate outside and to go outside for recreation. Like that's something when I travel, especially to places like to third world countries or other parts of the world, just seeing that it is such a privilege to be able to go out and just to play. And I really want first to like inspire more people to be able to do that and to create more opportunities to access the outdoors. But I mean, going back to my journey, so I was always really concerned about climate change ever since I read about it in high school. And when you hear about the problem, you're like, this is so big and insurmountable. Like, what am I going to do? And when I was getting ready to graduate from college, I went to the University of Utah. In my senior year, I did a political internship for the governor of the state of Utah for his environmental advisor. So I worked in the governor's office and I learned a ton about policy that way. It was really fascinating, but I felt really frustrated in a cubicle. I really felt like sometimes you have to go down that wrong path for a little bit to be like, no, this is the wrong way. I need to turn around and get back on the right trail. So after doing that, I was like, this is just not my calling right now. Maybe in the future I could go back to that. And so after that was 2010. Then 2011, I was dating Forrest Shearer, who is really good friends with Jeremy, and he invited me to become a part of Protect Our Winters. And all of a sudden, I had a way to engage on this issue that I had been trying in my own little way to create progress on for so long. And it was just really nice to feel like a part of a community, because activism sometimes, like these issues of the world, like global climate change, it can just seem so overwhelming. And it was really nice to have this little crew of people. And I remember in 2011, we did the first ever Hot Planet Cool Athlete School Assembly here in Salt Lake City, Utah, to a group of 1,000 high school students. And they were so stoked and we were stoked. And like, I think just one of the things I love about working with Protect Our Winters is that instead of starting discussions about climate change from this place of doom and gloom, because to be honest, it can be really depressing at times, we start it from this place of fun. And I think that helps to insulate us from those hard conversations that we go on to have, like coming from it from this place of shared love of the outdoors. Like everybody has can relate to that feeling of happiness and joy in nature. And I think
Right.
that's why it's really fun and it's so effective.
Right. We all
Go
have like our childhood associations, our passions, and what I find is really cool about like the outdoor state is if you're passionate about the outdoors, like you can be you are a part of this outdoor state, and the
Yeah.
importance of protecting our natural playgrounds because growing up, like maybe we do take it for granted, and what we remember as our greatest memories are running around and climbing rocks with our family or with our friends or skiing down, like going on epic family trips to go ski and seeing those changes. I think it makes you, even like with what happens in government now and how POW is so active on the legislative front. I think it's really important to me because, we can all as citizens do our part. And something I love about the idea of like what you mentioned about like how do you take part more in lobbying or being active? It's like every single citizen has the ability to lobby because that's our right. Like we put our representatives in office. So like let's hold them to like what they promised us,
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, it's just so much better to go to DC with like a group of other athletes and yeah, to be like going to DC with you or when I've gone with Protect Our Winners, it's just I feel like we're such rock stars when we walk through the halls of Congress. Like people are excited to meet us and I'm humbled to be with such like legends of the sport when I go there. I always have that like imposter syndrome, like I shouldn't be here. Like, how did I get here? But I always end up learning from so many of the people that I meet there. And one of the people I met on the last trip I did in September with Protect Our Winners was Naomi Oreskes, who's a Harvard professor. And I recently interviewed her for this podcast that I've just started creating called The Caroline Gleich Show. So my podcast with Naomi is sort of everything you need to know about climate change right now. And she wrote this book called Merchants of Doubt, where she goes through and talks about how the fossil fuel industry took a lot of the same tools as the tobacco industry in creating this widespread denial and misdirection and misinformation and confusion. And it really helped me there's been times in my journey as an activist where I found it really hard to speak up about climate because I was so afraid of the trolls and the harassment that I might get. And so her book and this talk I just did with her really just, I don't know, it just gave me a lot of confidence that I'm doing the right thing and I'm on the right track. And it really helped me find my voice on climate again, because it's like not always easy to keep speaking up about these things. There's definitely times when it gets to be pretty hard.
Yeah. I mean, personally, I found it can be a daunting process just to not, I think that having your facts in line is always really important and knowing what you're talking about. Mm-hmm. But as an athlete who does use my platform and use my voice, because I don't really want to be like someone who's just vanilla on everything and doesn't just take a stance, because I think that that's really important, is that we're ambassadors for our sports and also our community. But I think that the messages that you can get of like that I've gotten, like, focus on what you're good at, climbing. And then I think like, I have a university degree from Columbia University, which is a great academic institution. And I've been doing my part in learning more about climate. So I think that whether that's the case or not, I think that sharpening our toolbox, and like you said, like it is easier when we come together and we're athletes and we're advocates. And we kind of have this unified front. But what would be your advice? I'm sure we have people out there who haven't gone and lobbied before, like just diving in, like, do you have any sort of advice for people who want to take part that haven't necessarily done it before?
Yeah, I think for me, it was just like it was very similar in a lot of ways to my journey as a ski mountaineer. Like I didn't start my journey going to climb and ski the sixth highest peak in the world. It took me a decade or more of building my skills on smaller mountains around the world to get there. And it's been really similar with my journey with environmental activism. I didn't start out by going to Congress to testify to the Senate. Like I started doing that internship at the governor's office and showing up to local meetings. And even today, I still see that we can create so much change at the local level. And so becoming more involved in your city council meetings and understanding how our grid is powered and what kinds of energy sources are fueling what turns on your lights at home, and starting to advocate to have more renewable energy to that portfolio. And I would just say, one of the biggest things, joining an organization is such a great way to harness our collective power, because there's a lot you can do on your own and every little thing matters. But when we all work together and make our voices heard, we can have a big impact. And nowhere do I see that we can have a bigger impact than when it comes to turning out for the polls in November. That is just one thing. Like, everyone, I know that you're all pledged to vote, so make sure that you are, like, I always vote by mail because then I can take more time with the ballot and really dive into the issues. And I would just say also that it can feel like I was talking earlier about this imposter syndrome, and with climate activism, sometimes I'm like, who am I to speak up about this? Like, I travel, I drive a car, like I do all these things, but what we're trying, you can still speak up, and it's about progress over perfection. And I think just understanding that the kinds of things we're trying to create, like, we want to create a society where we can travel and we can have a vibrant, booming economy without producing the kinds of emissions. Like, it's possible. We have the technology. We just need the political will. And so don't be too hard on yourself, and try not to be too hard on other people as well, because I see that there's just a lot of shaming that happens. And I just wish, like, for the most part, we all agree on things. So let's take that energy and use it to forward these bigger policy items and use it to mobilize others to vote.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think that always, if you want to have a voice in society, one of the most important things is to use it by voting, because that is your impact on elected officials. And I think that it's interesting because there, as you mentioned, like the imposter syndrome, I think that that's something that all of us experience in our different industries, and negativity towards any sort of aspect of that, of like, whether it's online trolls or just people who don't believe that climate change is important. I think it's about coming together and recognizing that this isn't something that's divided across like partisan lines. It's a nonpartisan topic, and let's all come together and find the solid ground.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess the other thing that I've really come to learn is that climate change affects so many other issues. And so one of the ways I sort of began my journey as an environmental activist was working really hard on issues of clean air, because in the Salt Lake Valley where I live, we get horrible air pollution. And then like later on in my career, I became really more outspoken about gender equality. And I know that that's something that you're really great at speaking about. And I really appreciate that work that you do, because speaking about gender equality, it took me like until I was in my early 30s until I felt like that was something I could tackle. But what I see in the activism around climate is that it's a way we can work on air quality, gender equality, all these different issues. They're really encompassed under this broader tackling climate change. And by working on that, we can protect public lands, we can advocate for women. Like, there's just so many different ways that it affects every layer of our society. And so that's been something that has really motivated and inspired me, is just seeing how intersectional being a climate activist can be.
Yeah, I mean, frankly, there's like over 7.7 million climbers in the US, and like climbers, skiers, like the idea of us all teaming up and coming together, like case in point, something that you'll see is the CORE Act and preserving over 400,000 acres of public land in Colorado. Like, I live in Boulder, and we may take for granted the places that we can go out and recreate even during COVID-19. Like, we live in a state where we're pretty fortunate that within reason, like, we've been able to still be active and enjoy like sunshine and just kind of like that refresh button of fresh air. And I think that stuff like that is really important for just thinking about even like the long-term health of our citizens and also Mother Nature. I mean, I think it's awesome that like here we are talking about this, which is such an important topic. And Earth Day was yesterday. Jeremy and Tommy had such a sweet conversation about this that was so impactful. That I think that it does come down to kind of like what you were discussing, is coming together and recognizing our differences, but putting them aside for something that's so important.
Absolutely. And there are 14 million skiers in the US, and you're a skier too, right?
Yeah, I grew up skiing. I skied before I climbed, believe it or not. I started skiing when I was 3, but obviously like not to your level. But I mean, what are some of the effects of climate change that you see in your sport?
Yeah, I mean, climate change has really made a lot of these mountain routes a lot more dangerous. Like the increased ice fall has been a huge problem, and it's really sad in certain places, especially like more equatorial places. They're talking about last ski descents because the glaciers will have receded so much that we won't be able to ski these lines anymore.
Wow.
I just remember like I did a trip to the Cordillera Blanca in Peru in 2015, and we were just like in our tent all day and all night, just listening to constant ice fall all around us. And I still get like sort of like these, when I hear like loud noises in the mountains, I just get so scared still because it was just this deafening ice fall all around, and the conditions were really tricky, and some of those glaciers have just receded so much. I mean, the other thing we're really seeing a lot here in Utah is that our snow lines are getting higher and higher. So our higher elevation ski resorts, they're still doing okay for now. But our lower altitude ski resorts, they're at like 50 or 60% of snowpack. And meteorologists and climatologists have forecasted that by 2100, by the year 2100, those many resorts here in Park City will have lost 100% of their snowpack. And
Wow.
so it's not just like skiing, that's our water, and that's our rivers, and that's farmers that are affected, and ranchers and anglers, and it really does touch every layer of society.
Totally. And I love the fact that, you know, like by uniting the different athletes, I think it's really impactful, because in climbing, maybe we're not experiencing the snowpack issue as alpinists, maybe we are, but you know, like having lost plenty of friends due to avalanche danger, but also like experiencing on my own expeditions, like really bad rockfall and the sporadic weather. You know, something other than just voting is also like emailing and calling our representatives. I think that that's a point that is really easy to do, especially in today's world. We're so virtual and we're all connected, you know, through our screens at the moment, but it's like you can just go on to your local official sites and send them an email about something, even if it's like copying and pasting the language that I feel like you can find on POW's website, and using that as a framework.
Yeah, and just keep showing up. Like the way that I got to where I got as a ski mountaineer is by just continuing to show up for those early mornings when it's super cold, and just like being prepared. And the same thing with my activism. It's like showing up to marches and rallies, showing up to hearings, to continue showing up, taking up space, and making your voice heard. I think that that's really how we can, because it's like some of the work we have an immediate payoff, but other times it's like, this is a long haul. So we have to be in it for this long journey.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think that it's kind of like the way that you would prepare for any expedition that you go on is like you whittle it down piece by piece and keep persevering. And I love the idea of being an imperfect advocate, an activist as well. Like, I think that I'm not always going to know the way to answer a question in the best manner. And I wish and I want to learn more about this so I can be a more educated and poignant voice. But I think that it is really impactful to come together and also to do our own individual parts.
Absolutely. Cool. Well, should we take some questions?
Totally.
Okay, let's start. We have a question. How are outdoor companies, adventurers, and athletes supporting the scientists who study how our natural playgrounds got there, how we interact with them, and what may happen to them in the future? That's a great question. There are a number of different resources for people to get more involved in citizen science. And so a few years ago, I actually took part in a microplastics study where I collected water samples in a few creeks that come out of the canyons, and I sent them to scientists. But for me, one of the ways that I'm doing that is through my podcast. I'm really trying to amplify the voices of scientists. And so one of the first podcasts was with a University of Utah epidemiologist, and then with Dr. Naomi Oreskes. And then I interviewed Dr. Len Nessifer, who's the founder of Natives Outdoors. And so I think that with climate and just with all of our messaging on climate, it's really important to lean into the science and to reach out to scientists and do what we can to support their messaging. And I think that a lot of brands are doing really similar things. I don't have any specific examples I can think of right now, but I know that they're doing it. Like, I feel like Patagonia does a lot of good stuff to support scientists. And yeah, I could try to follow up with more specific examples.
Yeah, I think it's great to see the advocacy work across the board with the companies that I work with, and it sounds like the companies that you work with, and just like as outdoor companies in general, the responsibility to the community to be supporting our natural playgrounds is really important. And I love that note on the scientists, and something that is also, I know that climbing enables you to access locations that maybe scientists can't. So using our sports as a way to provide informative samples can be a really useful technique.
Yeah. Okay, question for you, Sasha. You have been to DC advocating for access to public lands. Can you talk about the impacts on climate and our public lands?
Yeah, totally. I mean, the impact of climate in DC or globally?
Can you talk about the impacts on climate? I think maybe the question is about the intersection of climate, the impacts on climate and our public lands. So
yeah. I mean, like Bears Ears and
Bears is a great example.
Yeah, I think that something that's really important is like protecting our public lands from private development. Mm-hmm. And a lot of this legislation, unfortunately, happens behind closed doors without us being totally aware of what's going on. And there are like massive climbing areas being directly affected by the impingement on public lands. And protecting public lands is really inadvertently like a way to protect the climate as well, because outdoor recreation provides such a sustainable job source and also a sustainable approach to our climate. And I think that when people foster that connection that you have with what it means to be outdoors and these memories that you get to have, then implicitly you do have this connection to the outdoors that's really memorable. And even when it comes to being in DC and bringing representatives or senators or governors out climbing, like Senator Mark Warner, like I've been climbing with him. And I think that gives this memory of like the outdoors is something that I really appreciate. I mean, he was a part of, like, he was one of my dad's best friends, and like he was kind of like our chief in our little father-daughter tribe. And I think that was really important in like my own development of seeing like the importance of the outdoors, but also being out with people who have the ability to make the direct change in legislation on the Senate floor.
Yeah. Yeah. And the other thing that I would say is like protecting public lands is acting on climate and vice versa. Because in Utah, for example, 40% of the coal that's being mined and developed, that's happening on public lands. And so there's a lot of energy development that's happening on our public lands. And so you can really, it's really like this 1-2 punch where we can really fight, and we can really protect both these things, like our climate and our public lands at the same time. So it's kind of a win-win.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that protecting our places that we want to recreate is a great way to also meet the demands that are increasing in outdoor recreation. Like, it's something that you see in climbing a lot is overcrowded areas, and also advocating for proper leave no trace, and being a responsible steward within the outdoors is really important as well, in order to keep these areas protected too.
Yeah. Okay, next question we have. Do you have any recommendations on how to make a difference from a state that doesn't usually have environmental issues as an agenda item? It's hard to feel like my vote is helping in Alabama. And that is a great question, because I mean, in the state of Utah, like, we're so often fighting, like, we're so often working from a defensive position that there's hardly any positive environmental bills that are introduced. So it can be hard to feel like you're always sort of putting out fires. But, you know, I think there's just I'm trying to think. I mean, one way that I've worked really effectively with POW, and I work a lot with like local environmental nonprofits. And another resource to get involved on the super local level is Patagonia has a site called Patagonia Action Works, where you can connect with a local nonprofit near you. So they'll sometimes like have calls to actions for people that they need to come out and give public testimony or write an op-ed. And then sometimes I work with POW to bring in these bigger figures and the bigger picture idea. And so I think that you can combine both of those resources and work really effectively. And then I would not, there are like some more old school ways of activism, like writing an op-ed. And I think just writing a little bit more about your frustration or things that you would like to see, you know, writing an op-ed to your local paper to help get people more aware of these local issues in your backyard. I think that that is another way that you could help to create that positive change that you want to see. So yeah, it's a little bit of it's a hard question though. I feel like that same frustration a lot of times in Utah.
But I think it goes back to the whole idea of like, when you're facing adversity, you're facing haters who just disagree with you. And I think that being strong to your voice and knowing what you believe in and upholding that value, like, I think it is really important that in some cases, maybe the squeaky wheel does get the job done, and being out there and just that perseverance, like we talked about before. It's like, even if it looks a little grim right now, like, keep trying and know that you can make a difference.
Yeah, and also once we begin to come out of social distancing, I think it also would be cool to plan a march or rally, because for me, like, taking to the streets and exercising my constitutional right to peaceably assemble, I find that it helps me to overcome feelings of powerlessness and to reconnect with community. And so if you want to follow up, I would be happy to provide you with more resources if you want to plan a march or rally after we're done with social distancing, when it's appropriate.
That sounds great.
Yeah. Okay, so next question for Sasha. What else can we be doing besides voting, telling friends to vote, and email call our representatives?
I think that, like, using your voice, rallying your community, a lot of us, I mean, everyone in this chat has joined the Outdoor State, which means that you belong to a community that is really passionate about something that happens in the outdoor and natural playground. So I think that, kind of like what you just suggested, like protests or marches where you do come together, I think that linking together, and being a group and making that group collective effort can be really powerful as well.
But I want to reiterate that needs to come after voting. Like voting is so important. And even if it feels like your vote doesn't matter, it really does. Because if like in 2016, so many young people felt that same way and they didn't vote. And and we really, it's so important in November to elect climate champions. And so even if like you feel like at the national level that you don't get your pick, it's still, there's all these other elections at the local level where it really does make a difference. And so a great resource like Protect Our Winners is going to be, the Protect Our Winners Action Fund is going to be helping to create a voter guide that will help you decipher between these different candidates and to give you their environmental records. But if there's other issues that come up, don't be afraid to reach out to friends, to do the vote by mail so you can have more time with your ballot. And the outdoor community is over 50 million people, and that's almost 40% of the number of voters in the 2016 elections. And the outdoor community and young people are historically bad at turning out. So even if you feel like it doesn't matter, just please vote. Like, do me a huge favor, like have a voting party with your friends, like get fired up, because we can make a big difference with our vote.
But yeah, and I think that even if you disagree with the national level vote, I think it's really important to still cast your ballot for the person that you think is the best for climate change and addressing these issues. Because again, back to 2016, sure, there were plenty of people who disagreed with both candidates, but it's not like not voting is going to better the issue. I think that getting your voice out there and voting for the best of the world is really important too. And you know, like lack of voter registration was a huge issue in 2016. And I really hope too, like I mean, you guys all pledged to vote, so thank you, but like get your voices out there, like be heard, and let's make this world a better place.
Okay, we're gonna do 2 more questions. So for both of us, how do you deal with the haters or adversity? I want to hear your answer because I don't know what my answer is.
I mean, honestly, I think that growing a callous skin, like pun intended, I guess, with climbing has kind of been something that I've faced my entire life, and my entire career has been people disagree with maybe I look too girly, maybe I wear too much pink, maybe I don't look like a climber, to whatever spectrum that is supposed to represent. And I did come from a city. I didn't grow up in the outdoors, but I found the outdoors and I love the outdoors. And that's, you know, climbing's been a part of my life for the last 21 years in such a dominant way. And I think that a lot is sticking to your values and knowing that you build yourself a community of people that are really meaningful to you. And that you do care about their judgment and their ability to push you and inspire you. But I think at the end of the day, the people that dislike you, like they're always going to exist, and going down this endless pursuit to satisfy people is kind of like an endless pursuit in of itself. And so I think that like, it's remaining true to your values, because I think that that's something that guides us all as humans. But then B, like being aware that you're doing the best you can, and also you're being yourself. So I think that like being transparently, that in of itself is going to be a way that you remain true to who you are. And I think that like being that best version, and otherwise, you know, like silencing the noise and putting forward a positive voice and being a positive ambassador for our sport. As professional athletes, like we have the privilege to do what we love on a daily basis. And I think that that also comes with the territory of being a good role model and being a responsible person within our sports to advocate for what's important. But Caroline, I saw your REI video and I thought that was really awesome. Like it was really moving the way that you head on address like social media as well. Like, do you have any sort of advice yourself?
Yeah, I mean, I could really relate to the part that you said where people look at you and they're like, oh, you wear too much pink or you don't look like a climber. Because everyone looks at me and they're like, you're going to Everest, like you're going to base camp, right? Like you're not going to the summit. And what are you doing here? Like you shouldn't be here. You don't belong. And you couldn't possibly have done all these things. Like you just had unpaid guides take you. That's the latest one I've been getting. So I think what you said is important, to continue to stay true to your values and to trust your gut and to continue showing up and taking space, you know, because all these people are trying to tell me to like be small and go away. And I'm just going to keep like being big and taking up space. But I think the other thing is that what I learned from my case that you saw in the film Follow Through is that when it becomes criminal and when it's repeated and intentional and trying to cause you emotional harm, that we do need to hold people accountable. And like what Naomi Oreskes said is, if you're going to become a big activist, consider legal insurance in case you need to proceed with legal action. And so I do think that there are times that it's important to hold people accountable. I'm not going to track down every single person who says something negative about me, but if they keep doing it over and over and they call my house, you know, they call my phone, like I'm at a certain point, like I'm not just going to ignore and pretend like it's not a problem. So right. I would, yeah, at times you have to like, yeah, hold people accountable.
You have to stand up for yourself. And I think that repeated harassment with malicious intent is not okay. And I think unfortunately it's something that women do face more often than men. And you know, something that I've seen in my own career is knowing when to hold people accountable, when enough is enough, and being really confident with that. Because, you know, I mean, I had like a pretty public event myself, and I think the bottom line to me was, what is going to make this stop? And how can I use my voice to empower other women, other girls, other little boys, like whoever it is who goes through something like this, to know where the bottom line is?
Yeah, because a lot of the people that are doing it repeatedly, they're doing it to other people too. And I just would hate to see so many, I don't know, it was so hard. Like those situations are so hard. So I appreciate just, you know, all the great work you're doing and what a positive voice you are, and how you're able to take these things that are so hard to deal with and to find like the silver lining and to find these places of growth and progression from the challenges.
I think that we all have our inner circles, and having that network of positivity and where we can unify on making ourselves better people is really important to have.
Absolutely. Okay, last question for you. What is scarier, leading a never before done route or speaking with your reps?
I mean, I would say like leading in the unknown, probably. Like this last summer I was on this expedition, and there's just so much rockfall. We were on this little island off the west coast of Africa. It was called Sao Tome, so off the west coast of Guinea. And we were just in the jungle for like 23 straight days, and we didn't really know what the environment of the upper parts of this tower were, and not knowing like if these like TV sized craters are gonna like fall down thousands of feet above you. Like, I think that that's a little bit more terrifying than speaking to your reps. But at the same time, like that's a fair question, because within climbing, within skiing for yourself, like we have these safe spaces of what we do on a regular basis that may be insane to some people or look really intimidating. And I think that goes to say with like the practice that we put in day to day and the experience levels that we just like kind of chart under our own harnesses or belts, so to speak, and just gaining comfort in those different zones. And like the only way to really expand that comfort zone is by stepping outside of it. And so that goes for climbing, for skiing, and for advocacy.
Yeah. I mean, I think one of the great things when you call your reps or when you speak to them is that you usually talk to one of their staffers. And so I think that helps with my anxiety, because I get a ton of anxiety before I get way more anxiety from going to speak to Congress or to call my reps than I do from skiing, just because it's like, I don't practice it as much. So I'm the opposite. But no, that's a great question to wrap things up. Is there anything else you wanted to add?
No, but I definitely will subscribe to your podcast, and I'm excited to hear about your recent chats.
Cool. I would love that. Thank you so much. And thanks to everyone for tuning into today's episode. I am so grateful for this opportunity to connect with Sasha, who I'm like fangirling over here so hard.
No, thank you guys all for joining so much. And thank you for my welcome to being a part of POW. I mean, it means so much to me, and I'm really excited to be a part of this collective to make some changes.
Awesome. We're so happy to have you as part of the crew. And be sure to tune in next week to learn more about how to stop the money pipeline and find out if your bank is funding the fossil fuel industry and how you can change that. And that will be with fellow Alliance member Chris Davenport. Thank you all.
See ya.